To the Revive Edmonton Town Hall. I'm Scott Johnson, and I'll be moderating tonight's conversation for the next hour, part of Raheem Jaffer's citywide listening tour. Before we begin, please note that this session is being recorded as part of our effort to build transparency and gather feedback to shape the campaign. And if you're joining us online, we invite you to continue submitting your questions throughout the evening along the chat box on the right hand side of the screen. We'll be monitoring it throughout the session. I'd also like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We're gathered on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional land of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Dakota Sioux peoples. We honor the Indigenous communities who have cared for this land for generations and recognize their ongoing contributions to the city of Edmonton. So now let's begin an honest conversation over this next hour about how we can revive the city for all of Edmonton. Good evening, Raheem.
Good evening, Scott. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, as always. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight online. I think, obviously, I'm Raheem Jaffer, and I'm running to be the next mayor of Edmonton. And I think Edmonton deserves real change. That's the message I've been hearing over the last number of weeks. And that begins by listening. So I launched the Revive Edmonton tour because I wanted to rebuild trust, reset priorities, and bring accountability back to City Hall. Too many people feel like their voices don't matter anymore, and I'm here to try and change that. Our campaign is built on one simple promise for all of Edmonton. This means every community, every background, and every voice. If you believe in that mission, I'd love for you to join Team Jaffer. We're looking for volunteers, supporters, and donors. And I'd love to have you guys help us bring common sense back to City Hall. Please visit votejaffer.ca to sign up. And with that, I'll turn it back to Scott because I see there's already some questions coming in. So that's pretty exciting.
Well, why don't we start with this morning? You were at Macamee College as they were hosting a breakfast. Got a chance to talk to a lot of people. What were you hearing?
Well, first of all, just on that college, I was excited to be able to join Macamee and Calgary when they had their Stampede breakfasts, and I started to learn a little bit about the work that they do. I learned about their college, and I'd seen it before here in Bonnie Doon, which they took over the old Sears location there, obviously, for many years ago. And you can imagine how big that space is. I think they said something like 10,000 square feet. It's quite amazing, or even bigger than that. I might be making a mistake, but it was amazing to see they do a community pancake breakfast, and they invite not only all their students, their family, their friends, and of course the wider community. And just a great story of success of a family who came to Canada, similar experience as myself, almost as refugees, first time generation of Canadians coming here and working hard and wanting to give something back to the community, and built this idea of a college where, because a lot of people that they came across, including themselves, credentials weren't recognized here in Canada coming from another country. And they thought, how could they help facilitate a process for people to get retrained and maybe get into meaningful work while they're going through the challenge of setting up? It's amazing their amount of students. I think he said something like 2,300 students at this college, and they do some amazing work in the area of security and healthcare support. They even have a political experience program that you can take and learn all about how to get involved in the political system on all levels. So it's really an amazing college. I enjoyed spending some time there. And of course, I had the chance to meet some people, which was wonderful. Some people who I'd known, some people meeting for the first time. And the one common theme that I heard from people was that even though they had some tough questions for me as well, about my past, about my experience since I left politics, and then some who just wanted to reconnect with me, the common thread was that they all felt we need a change at City Hall, and they volunteered that. Whether or not they're going to make the decision to support us, I'm hoping I convinced them this morning, but I just sense that they are looking for something different than what they've seen, and the status quo is not an option. So whether it's existing councillors, existing candidates running for mayor, they want to reset what's happening. And so that was encouraging. That was something that was made loud and clear. And the pancakes weren't so bad either.
That's always a good thing. Well, you brought it up, the 15 years. Where you been? What have you been doing since you were high profile as the caucus chair from Edmonton for the whole Conservative Party as you were an MP?
Well, and it's a very good question, because I think people, it's hard. Like, I spent so much time in the public eye and involved in community work, and then getting a lot of media coverage, whether it was positive or negative. So of course, there a lot of people end up remembering that, and then there was a big pause for a long time, and so people were wondering, well, what exactly happened? And one of the tough questions someone asked me today was, well, how do we know we can trust you? Have you changed? I thought that was a fair question, especially you haven't seen me for a long time. Those are very reasonable questions. So I spent some time chatting with people, and I'll share some of that. Like, I think people were thinking, yeah, you were elected 4 times, which says something, but obviously some interesting news afterwards, and maybe wasn't as favorable. And then what were you focused on after that? I reminded her what I did on my launch for this campaign is that, luckily for me, I've been out of the limelight, but while I was in the limelight, uh, all my skeletons are out of the closet. There's none hiding in the closet. So if anybody wants to focus on the past and see what happened, they're welcome to do that. And I like to focus on the future and share those stories of what happened since then. Of course, even for myself, I took time away. I got involved with my own family, where I was able to spend the first 5 to 6 years with my son Xavier, because Helena, my partner at the time, she decided to go to law school, and that was a serious commitment. Which she, being going back to school as a mature student, she didn't want to rush it, and she did it over a 5 year period. So I was able to focus on being a stay-at-home dad, build that bond with my son, and also at the same time, which was very valuable to me, about learning about a number of things, which was getting involved with parent teacher boards at the school. I even served doing some fundraising at Garneau School, on the south side, obviously just close to White Avenue, while Xavier was there. And even before that, with the preschool, which we did some work, it was Windsor Park Preschool, and I got involved with the community there. We did some fundraising and stuff. So it was an exciting way to find out what other parents were thinking, what challenges they faced, how we could do a better job in helping our students learn and facilitate things. I really enjoyed that time, and it was nice to not have the stress of work or other things, because, as I said, I just focused and stayed with Xavier, and spent time with him and learned a whole new set of things. It was after the time that Xavier started grade 1 or 2, Helena finished law school, and I thought, okay, it's time to get maybe back into some projects. We were already involved in commercial property, and have been, our family, for a number of years, and particularly on White Avenue and other parts of the city. But I got more hands on with some of the business activity. My parents at the time, many of you may recall a restaurant that is now Rooster Kitchen, but used to be called Artisan Resto Cafe. My parents were getting ready to retire, and I had a couple guys who I wanted to help facilitate. They were looking to get into the business, but didn't have the means or the resources. So I was going to mentor them and work towards a takeover where I could buy my parents out, let them retire comfortably, and then focus on working with these two gentlemen to take over the restaurant. No one predicted the downturn in 2019, or, of course, the pandemic in 2020, which caused havoc on service industry businesses. Even our commercial properties took a beating, with tenants unfortunately exiting because of the stress and strain, and just not being able to make ends meet. So I stayed in the business just because it was so crucial to make sure that space stayed active and the lights stayed on. And of course, the work that's associated with a small business like that, especially when after you've gone through such a shock to so much of the economy, it was tough enough to continue on to run a business, and keep the lights on and keep my employees employed and make sure that cash flow was there. And that doesn't even factor in the challenges the city's put in front of us when it comes to businesses, and the lack of attention to a lot of things there, which really, created even more challenges, not only just for myself as a business person, but a number of business people right on the avenue that I was working hand in hand with, closures and challenges with security and other problems, which, as I said, was tough enough to run a business in the environment that we were facing. But then to have all these other challenges because of the lack of attention from the city on many of these priority areas just created more stress. And so, anyway, these are some of the things that I did after politics, as, during the gap before re-entering. But I tell that story about the business. I didn't go into the challenges of even when I used to walk with Xavier to school when he was younger, to now he's going into high school, and during the whole time in junior high, his school was only 8 blocks away, and we wouldn't let him walk in the morning because some of the challenges you see, especially on White Avenue, where he would have to walk down, or one of the side streets, and we didn't feel comfortable, and neither did he. At the end of the day, he would sometimes walk home. But these are challenges I've heard from a lot of parents when it comes to security and crime and issues that they're concerned when their families are involved. And so this just touches on a couple of reasons where, for me, I found myself complaining a lot. And my son, Xavier, was the one who looked at me and said, Dad, why are you complaining about the city? Why don't you do something about it? And this was what really culminated into me thinking, well, it's true. I've got a lot to offer as a person that has so much federal experience, almost 12 years working in different capacity in opposition and then in government. I have the experience of raising a family now and the challenges that families face day to day in dealing with issues in the city, whether it's making ends meet, safety, a number of challenges around their education. And then, of course, a business person getting back on the hands-on in the community and working with other business owners, whether it was working on the business association, Strathcona Business Association, or just along the block and along the street of White Avenue, and hearing what business owners were saying. So much concern and just concern and just frustration with where the city's been going, that I had to say, well, I think I've got something to offer to help change direction, to help revive some of the things we used to be so proud of in this city and that we know we have the potential to get back to. And so that was the motivating factor for me to then say, maybe I should put my name forward. I can obviously share these things that I feel I have to offer, but more importantly, to ensure we create an environment that attracts business to the city, not directs them elsewhere or forces others out of the city. Create a future for my son, and also fix the things that need serious attention, getting back to basics of what the city needs to do in order to function properly. So that's just it's a little bit of a bigger explanation to share the sort of step in the process of events that took place, culminating to this decision. But I really do believe that I have something to offer and to help, as I said, make this city better for all Edmontonians and have a reset at City Hall.
And that kind of leads to one of the questions that's shown up here in the chat box as we encourage your questions to come in and give us your views on what should be happening. The city needs to lower the cost of property taxes on businesses. This is submitted here. Too many companies are moving to Atchison, Leduc, and Sherwood Park to save money on property taxes. So has anything in your listening bubbled up to the surface that you say, yeah, that's a good idea. I want to pursue that to improve the bottom line and make life a little easier for not only property tax owners, but business operators as well, who pay a double tax, so the business tax and the property tax.
And this question, it ties into the property tax issue, which I'm happy to address. But it was interesting today. It just reminded me of somebody that raised with me the concern that they had linked to the way infills were happening in their neighborhood, that because of some development that the fellow that has been living in this area for a while, and just the way it's changing, he's and rents and everything else, he was deciding to move his family out to Sherwood Park, where it might be a little bit cheaper than the option here, a little bit different when it comes to the businesses. But again, that property tax issue is significant. And people expect that with inflation there's going to be a slight rise in property taxes every so often. But to have back to back increases that we saw of the last 2 years of nearly 17% is way too much, way too fast, and very difficult for many people to accommodate. I've heard this not only for individuals like this gentleman who's thinking of moving his family to Sherwood Park, but businesses as well, because we're not creating that environment to attract businesses here. They're looking at other areas that are more competitive. We have some local suppliers of product, whether it's coffee, um, other fresh products that we obtain. There's one particular supplier. He used to have his shop on the south side of Edmonton. He would roast coffee and import coffee roasted, and then obviously sell it from there. He decided to move his family to an acreage out in Stony Plain, and then after the fact found out that, wow, Stony Plain would welcome him there with his operation, and no, they wouldn't even need they just have to apply for a business license. No taxes, no cost, no nothing. And they moved everything out there. Now they have a shop there. They're employing people there. People, some of them, I think, moving closer to where that is. So that's an exodus, again, relating to cost to operate in the city. But when you have this phenomenon where people, whether it's individuals, businesses, other organizations, are thinking twice of setting up in a city that supposedly has great infrastructure, great things to offer, whether it's restaurants, whether it's festivals, whether it's a number of other amenities that a city like Edmonton has, and they're thinking of moving outside of those city boundaries because of the cost. We have a major problem. And especially when we have more and more people that we know over the course of the next little while, as we've seen, moving from jurisdictions even more expensive than Edmonton, for instance, Vancouver and Toronto. We need to start thinking in a much bigger way of how do we attract those great paying jobs, that investment to create those great paying jobs. And it starts by making sure that our taxes and our costs for facilitating businesses are at a competitive level where they're not at all competitive right now. We've lost complete sight of that. And so I'm hoping that with some of the things that people will see very soon, and we're hearing obviously ideas and solutions on how to be able to tackle some of these problems and hopefully reverse this trend of increasing costs, increasing taxes, increasing regulations around businesses. We hope to launch very detailed plans after the course of hearing more and more from Edmontonians over the time of these town halls, hopefully before the end of the month or early in September, very detailed ways from what we're hearing as to how to address this and reverse this trend that has been so damaging for Edmonton going forward.
Because I remember from my reporting days, there were examples of warehouses on one side of 215th Street and the other side of 215th Street in the city or outside of the boundary. And the difference in taxes and cost per square foot was enormous. So, what are they doing without that we're doing with that throws it out of whack? And how would you like to see that changed?
Well, I think one of the things and this speaks to a bigger question too, that I'm happy to share a little bit about, but it speaks to the idea of coordinating more effectively. I don't know why the current council and mayor have sort of become so insular and so limited in their view and scope. I've talked about Edmonton punching above its weight for so many years when I was younger, when I represented this city federally, how proud I was about the things that were happening here and how we were able to collaborate to bring so many things to the region, to the city. Everyone benefited from it. From what I understand, there is not even that coordination with the greater Edmonton community, whether it's the councillors and the mayor from Edmonton working with the wider greater Edmonton area. I've heard there's just been animosity developed there. The cost structures that they were proposing in making surrounding areas pay for some of our infrastructure was out of whack. So this whole system sort of broke apart where there was before a little bit better coordination, negotiating of how we might be able to share some of the infrastructure costs and work together. This has gone completely out the window. And so now a lot of these neighboring jurisdictions are doing what they think is best for their communities to thrive at the expense of Edmonton. Again, the lack of coordination and working in a proactive way, which we've seen demonstrated endlessly in this council where they can't even seem to work together. But the other point that I was going to make is how effective leadership is able to not only work with those communities around Edmonton, but coordinate effectively with the provincial government. This is our major partner, whoever is in the premier's chair, whether it'll be Nenshi in the future or currently Danielle Smith. That is a major partner to Edmonton, whether it's on infrastructure, whether it's on justice issues, whether it's on focusing on how to attract things to the city and develop strategies to be able to benefit the whole province by making sure Edmonton's on the same page on things with the premier's office, and the premier's office finds out what Edmonton's doing, and the MLA's all working together with the councillors. This is how you have a focused policy that has success in so many different areas. We don't even have a situation where the mayor walks over to the legislature, knocks on the door, and is invited in for coffee. It's that acrimonious. So, how do you get on the same page when it means that current players who are supposed to look out for the best interests of this city won't even try to talk to each other? That's just a shame, and it's such a disadvantage for our taxpayers, and hence now they're paying more for less.
Is it going to get worse because the then Municipal Affairs Minister Rick McIver ended the funding for the Edmonton Region Municipal Board? So there was provincial money coming to all the municipalities to work together, and he ended that both in Calgary and in Edmonton. Do you see that as a problem?
I think like anything that does that sort of thing that creates a challenge for communication, for coordination, again, I think it stems for this evolution of the environment that we see that's become so acrimonious, where people have become either partisan or whatever you want to call it. It's just not in the interest of how we should be managing our city, or in some cases, the relationships with the province. So I think, again, some of these things could easily be addressed by open lines of communication, addressing priorities that we can all start on to say, here's what's important. That's the commonality. Let's try to work from there. And where we run into differences or challenges of how we approach things, we'll take a break from that, but at least start from a place where we can all start communicating effectively for the interests of our taxpayers. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're what level of government it is. We're all the same. It's all the same taxpayers. So ultimately, we have to do our best to ensure that we have a collective vision to work together on with these different levels of government. And there are a lot of commonalities. I would argue there's more commonalities for trying to ensure Edmonton and Calgary and other regions of this province are doing well, because it benefits obviously the provincial government too. It's all hand in hand. I remember when I was at the Stampede, I would say, I'm so excited to see this happening in Calgary or this happening in Calgary. Maybe that it would be great if we collaborated, because there's some opportunities that we might be able to do well, but in partnership with Calgary. And people were shocked to hear this kind of language, because they said it's just become so territorial that they don't even hear cities saying within the same province, how can we collaborate? How can we work together? There's going to be opportunities that we might be able to deliver on better than Calgary, or vice versa. So if we're communicating and working together, all of us benefit as Albertans, and the cities prosper.
And the province has dangled the carrot at the end of the stick. They have for several years now. If municipalities work together, there's cost efficiencies there, but they also sweeten the pot a little bit and put some money towards that. So, as you've been mulling over and now running for mayor, have you talked to other mayors of the region to say, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we work together on this or that?
I haven't had the chance to chat with too many of the other. I've had some talks with councillors, some other representatives. I did have a chance to run into a few mayors at the Stampede as well, that I was able to talk to from smaller areas. And again, I think the one thing that continued to come up was the idea of partisanship and this unwarranted sort of spirit of competition, which of course all the municipalities have to compete in order to put forward what's best in their region to attract attention, attract investment, attract people. But it shouldn't be at the expense of other areas within the province. There should be a collaboration, because again, I have to stress that if one area of the province generates more investment generates jobs, generates activity. It lifts everyone up. And the more we can coordinate with that, it helps to benefit both cities and this province. So I think one of the things that I'm hearing for sure, regardless, and it's not, maybe I haven't had the chance to directly chat with every one of the surrounding area mayors, but I remember back in the day too, when I served as an MP, there was a lot more coordination. Like I would go to events and meet with the other mayors back in the day from Leduc or from St. Albert or from wherever, and there was an effort to coordinate. There was an effort to understand, hey, what are you guys looking for? Where can we be helpful? And vice versa. There was a spirit that really helped, as I said, to build a better province and better municipalities. I don't know. Well, I do have a sense why that's changed. Of course, like I said, the partisanship and the acrimony in some cases, but that has to be broken, and I think that has to be really focused on why it's so important for the region and municipalities to work together. And again, it comes down to leadership. I think that's something that has become clear for a lot of people, is if you don't have that leadership to effectively coordinate that way, or that open spirit to work with others and to try to bring people together rather than divide, you're going to get these outcomes, like I said, that are not going to be in the best interest of all of our taxpayers. So I think many people, I'm encouraging them to listen to their candidates, listen to the mayor candidates, find out who is legitimately able to deliver, maybe from past record or example, that type of spirit of cooperation to be able to work in the best interest of the region rather than create division.
All right. We're halfway through this. We welcome your questions as we come up with ideas, listen to what your priorities are as we try to revive Edmonton and make it a better city. And you touched on a nerve a week or so ago with bike lanes. Everybody, it seems, is talking about them now. They have bike lanes in Calgary too. And out of the Calgary Herald today, word from Premier Smith and Transportation Minister Dreeshen that bike lanes are temporary and can be removed if they don't make sense. That was what they told the Calgary Herald. What are you hearing about bike lanes after you introduced it as a main plank in your platform to have a moratorium?
Well, I've often been referred to as a trailblazer, so maybe that's what it was. I sparked this whole debate with the talk of bike lanes. Who knows? But I think one of the things that I want to make clear, because I think there's been some either confusion or concern that I was calling for, complete reversal of bike lanes, and that's not the truth at all. All I was saying, let's have a reset for now. Let's pause any future creation of bike lanes. They've really proliferated in this city over the course of the past decade. We've seen bike lanes grow everywhere, including in some areas like cul-de-sacs, I was told recently, where they're expanding the sidewalks for bike lanes, which seems to me a little bit odd. But again, it just seems to me that there's a lot of focus on bike lanes. And what we haven't focused on is where those bike lanes have had a negative impact on our other goals, like whether it's development of housing, whether it's negative economic outcomes because of the way the bike lanes were placed. So I'm not looking at all to say that I want to rip out bike lanes or cancel the $100 million program. I'm just saying, let's put a pause on it. Let's figure out what makes the most sense, because I know there's communities that have been very upset of how bike lanes have gone down within their communities and creating huge traffic problems there. But as I said, I pointed to one of the examples, and there's a whole bunch of others. We know about the one in front of the Chinese community, the Benevolent Society, the senior center downtown. Bike lanes right in front. You can't even get access by seniors that are getting dropped off as easily to the front entrance. Same thing off of 83rd and 109th Street, a property there that has been sitting empty now for 8 years vacant, when it was supposed to have been built into housing, which is something we need so desperately. So when you have an outcome with bike lanes, completely the opposite impact, because there's ways to still have adjusted the bike lane to allow for bike lanes to continue to have function on 83rd Avenue, 83rd Avenue as they did, but they could have stopped just before they got to 109 so that they wouldn't have hindered the economic development and housing aspect that we so desperately need. There's other examples of this, so maybe we could have looked at options where you didn't need to have an actual barrier on side streets because there's not as much traffic. You can easily have paint on the sidewalk or on the part of the road to ensure the bikes still have their right of way, but not have to spend so much in creating what ends up to be nightmares in some of these communities. So this is what I've been talking about, is the idea that let's really give our heads a shake and say, wait a minute, where can we do a better job with bike lanes? Where have bike lanes had a negative impact? And let's address that so that we don't continue to have the outcomes where it wasn't really what the intention was, but because of just going down the road without looking at the impact more effectively, you have these outcomes that unfortunately make everyone upset, when something like bike lanes should be non-evasive, non political issue, but it's become one because we just haven't been able to be the current council and the leadership hasn't been able to just make the decisions that are best relating to bike lanes for certain areas.
What did you think of what came out of this meeting between Mayor Gondek and the province?
Well, you see, again, I think it speaks to the theme we were just talking about a little while ago, which is if you don't have a working relationship, if you don't have the ability to go back and forth and say, hey, what's working, what isn't, and have a real heart to heart on many of these issues and open lines of communications, frustration comes on all levels. You get frustrated citizens, you get frustrated stakeholders, you get frustrated provincial and municipal leaders that then end up, instead of working together, start working against each other, which is completely the opposite. And the only one that suffers at the end of the day, the taxpayers, the Albertans. In this case, it would be the Edmontonians. But if you had an open spirit of cooperation to try to solve these problems before they blow up to the level that they do, you'd never have the province sort of shaking a stick and saying, well, you better do this or you better do that. It just seems like the whole group that we've had elected, especially at the municipal level, again, is not thinking in practical ways to be able to resolve some of these things and work in partnership, in tandem in some cases, with the different levels of government. Instead, it's a fight, which makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah, and you talk about the adversarial aspect of it. The province does give out hundreds of millions of dollars in grants towards capital projects. But what do you have to do to make sure the money is spent wisely? What kind of checks and balances do you want to have to go through to make sure we're not putting good money after bad?
Well, and I think there needs to be better oversight in many of these cases. This is where I'm trying to learn more about how the city functions in this capacity, because it seems to me there's decisions made, but whether or not after going ahead with the decision, there's a process to step back and look and see, okay, have the outcomes actually been negative, positive? How have we met certain budgets? That oversight seems to be missing or hijacked somewhere, because otherwise you'd be able to, whether it's working proactively with the bureaucracy or their ability to see where the outcomes of some of these decisions are having a negative impact, to be able to correct them. So whether it's the infill issue, whether it's the bike lane issue, there's a lot of other issues, including crime and security. There seems to be just not the ability to revisit directions, budgets, and check what exactly is the oversight to ensure the outcomes are matching the goal. That seems to be completely out the window. I don't understand it. Like, I know at the federal level, you have a lot of different oversight to check, whether it's the auditors are not working properly or something is broken down in the process. It just seems like for some reason there's not that type of follow-up. I've heard over and over again that the council itself, from people who I've talked to, there seems to be no ability for a proper listening connection, whether it's town halls, whether it's the ability for citizens to not only communicate their concern with something, but then actually feel like they've been heard. Because again, if that was there, that connection between certain communities and what the impacts of these decisions are having, if they were actually being heard, again, I think you'd have some oversight in some of this. But I the only thing I can say, and I've said this on earlier town halls, is that because there's such an ideological way of decision making with not looking at the practical side of things, you have outcomes that unfortunately A, don't listen to citizens, and B, have sometimes the negative impact than what the intention of the decision was, because you're not being practical in certain cases and reviewing what the impact is in the areas where that definitely wouldn't have been the intention, I'm certain, of those decision makers making that decision.
Adrian writes in, narrow bike lanes like in the Strathcona area are fine. However, the double wide on each side of 132nd Avenue is ridiculous. Now, 132 Ave is a major thoroughfare. What do you think of moving bike lanes off the main road and putting it on a side street?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. I think we touched on this in our last town hall, and in fact, that 132nd Avenue, I did also receive an email from someone that I'm planning. I've forgotten their name. I have to look it up, but they were also concerned about the bike lanes and the plan over in that neighborhood, and I want to go out there and visit it. And so I was going to plan to coordinate with him to just see exactly what's being proposed, because again, I've seen it now in other areas, and that's exactly right. What other options would there be without creating more congestion for traffic, without creating safety concerns or confusion? Side streets often, some of the older neighborhoods might be a little smaller, some of the new ones bigger, but there's ways to look at options that will not affect that neighborhood negatively, especially on 132nd, which like I said, we're looking forward to going and seeing exactly what is being proposed and if there are other options. And I'm sure there's other options. The citizens have been speaking quite loud and clear about their concerns in that area. So again, this would be something the city would be able to take a step back and say, okay, well, if there is this much concern, what can we maybe do better if we can work with that community to see where maybe a bike lane would make more sense. If there's another option, look at that, but not just plow ahead and say, screw you. In essence, we're just going to do what we believe. And that, even though the city has a mandate to do what's in the best interest of the city, how can you justify this kind of a process where you have people visibly upset, their properties being affected, the negative impact to the economy, and yet you still push ahead? So, of course, I'd be open to the idea of looking at other options. I'm planning to go out and visit 132nd Avenue soon. So I'm all for the ability to look at different options that won't create the negative outcomes that we've been speaking about.
And there's a multi-year, decade-long or more neighborhood renewal program that's already underway. It's already been paid for. We paid taxes to fund this project over a 10-year period, so that's taken care of. Should that bike lanes be worked into neighborhood renewal?
Well, I think there's ways to be able to do that if, again, the neighborhoods are open to it. I think that's the first priority. Is that, again, I don't know if the type of consultation that was required to move ahead with something like this was done effectively. We've been told it has, but then when I see these outcomes of people being very upset about how some of this development's happening, I think, again, there's always should be a room to adjust and review and to see how to make the outcomes better than what was planned. So, of course, I'd be open to that. I'd be open to looking at other options that make sense relating to bike lanes. And whether or not there have been these bigger plans that have already been approved, we still have an obligation as elected officials, if I'm lucky enough to be one, to ensure that the outcome is not somewhat turns out to be negative, especially when the plan was initially put in place and what the goal was. If there are circumstances where outcomes are going sideways, we have to revisit and ensure that community is not being impacted negatively.
All right, Adrian sent in a other question. What strategies would you implement to help reduce crime in neighborhoods?
And that's a big question. That's a big concern, not only in neighborhoods, but in very urban parts of the city where there's entertainment districts and others, often linked very close to neighborhoods. Like I think about White Avenue. We're a business entertainment area called BIA exists along White Avenue, but just south north, there's very meaningful communities that have been there a long time. And unfortunately, some of that crime that you see in some of the more entertainment districts, some of the areas we go out, whether it's downtown or others, there's communities directly affected by this. One of the things that we talked about that I knew was very effective, but I haven't seen it being done in a lot of parts of the city as effectively, is the community policing aspect, where you do have groups of police on foot that are patrolling the area day and night, and often accompanied by different other service people, whether it's people experiencing mental illness, whether it's people experienced in issues relating to substance abuse, that work with them to ensure that when they are dealing with certain situations, it's a comprehensive approach to try to deal with some of the challenges they have to face, which have really changed over the course of the last decade. But the community policing is something I think we can really build on, because I was so disappointed to see this evolution of the defund the police movement, because what you're telling your people, your men and women in uniform, is, hey, we don't trust you, which is outrageous given the risks that they take every day. And sometimes things are not going to go as smooth as you like. It's a messy job, and they're taking that on behalf of all of society, trying to keep us safe. Where issues come up, we can address them, and we can work with the police to ensure that those issues are improved on, that the outcomes aren't negative. But let's not forget that this is our front line of defense in many cases when things go wrong. And if we work with them to ensure that they have an active and supported role in the communities, and we give them the support they need outside of just the policing aspect, we're going to see some positive outcomes. We saw some great outcomes in the mid 90s and early 2000s with that community policing model on White Avenue. And we were able to deter crime and keep things safe, and have people come out and enjoy all hours of the day because of that strategy. And I think something has broken down over the course of the last number of years, for sure. But particularly just recently, we've started seeing the police and the city council and mayor talk again, which is, again, so unfortunate, because whether we like it or not, and I talk about this theme of, people being acrimonious, not working in the spirit of cooperation. Here's another example. Your police are essential. It's one of the largest budget items, if not the largest budget item that the city spends on. And yet that leadership group has no relationship with the police, or it's a negative relationship. You're going to get outcomes that are never going to be effective in policing strategies unless you repair that and have that spirit of cooperation. But realize it's a tricky business, policing, and you're not going to have always these outcomes that you're going to be happy with. There's going to be, unfortunately, tough situations that might arise, but you got to deal with those, and you got to figure out ways to improve. And that in particular will help, I think, to deal with some of these problems in the neighborhoods where we've also seen crime really blossom, unfortunately. This also touches one last thing I'll mention, relation to transit. We've been we plan to make announcements on transit soon, as we are still hearing from people. But one of the challenges, again, because for instance the LRT, there's many people who don't ride the LRT, or in some cases the buses. Some have no choice, but they don't feel safe on those unfortunate transportation vessels, because there's no way to stop those who shouldn't be necessarily on those trains or buses from being on them. And so what's happening as a result of that, when people are riding the train, the LRT, or the buses, where they just get free transportation, they can enter and exit whenever they like, they're getting out to communities that they wouldn't normally be in, because now it's accessible. Now they can find areas where they can maybe target more frequently, go in and out of those neighborhoods because they get free transportation. This is something that also has to change, and that will help specifically dealing with that crime spreading into neighborhoods that we would have never seen that happen even 5 years ago. So strengthening the security, and I've proposed the idea of putting turnstiles on the LRT stations. Unfortunately, it's going to be a costly implementation, because the design of these things are completely out of whack in trying to ensure that those people who shouldn't be on the trains aren't on the train. So we have to revisit that and develop some sort of barrier. But that also would help that challenge that we're seeing of the that crime and break-ins and other things happening in parts of the city you wouldn't never expect it to happen.
Is that something you would stage? Because there are a lot of LRT stations.
Yeah, this is something that I'm really racking my brain, but trying to solicit some expert advice on how this can be done, because I believe firmly that, and out of anywhere I've traveled in the world, U.S., international, other places, it's clear that without some sort of a system that has a barrier for those who are obviously paying to be on that service or have the accessibility for that service, go through the process to be a barrier to get on before they get on to use that service. You have outcomes that have happened that have been really unfortunate, like we see here in Edmonton. So clearly that has to happen to improve ridership, but we'll have to see how we can manage that, because it's going to be a costly change. But I'm sure there's ways that we can leverage again money from the provincial government and possibly the federal government as we start to tackle how and what to focus on first, but ensure that any new development, as we have now stations being built with the extension going west of the city from downtown, make sure those are now, before they actually build the final product, repurposed to include those turnstiles, so we can start to nip some of those costs up ahead of time before they're actually finished the project. As we know, it's been delayed anyway by 2 years.
And I guess it was a real jolt to the system. COVID was, because at that one point there, we just weren't riding the LRT or the buses, but the homeless and those with mental addiction, drug addictions, and mental illnesses were taking over the system, and we've slowly had to work our way to reverse that. So, how do you see what went wrong then being made right now?
Well, I think, like I said, there is this also ties into some the areas of enforcement and crime and punishment, and there's different views on all this, of course, but I've seen this real shift where we've allowed certain behavior, we've normalized certain behaviors. So those who partake in certain crimes or certain behavior that we would have normally not tolerated out in the public, or happening against our businesses or graffiti, whatever you call it, there's been a normalization since COVID. And so many of the people who are choosing to continue to perpetuate these kind of things against businesses, against members in society and others, they've become really emboldened, almost blazoned, in the sense that they can do whatever they want. I've come across those people and have been shocked at how brazen they are when it comes to doing whatever it is they're doing, because at the end of the day, they've said it to me, well, no one's going to do anything about it, no one's going to stop us. And so you have to start shifting the thinking again and saying, well, are these normalized behaviors that we should tolerate? Are we creating two uh, levels of society members, ones who follow the rules, pay all their bills, uh, try to make the community better, and those who just, without any concern, just are flagrantly against that? So you have to hold people accountable for certain things that they're doing repetitively. There's those, as I've already said, that need help, that I believe we can and have an obligation to support, to help those ones with mental challenges or drug dependency. But there's others that just take advantage of the situation, that we have to have not only an enforcement strategy that is effective, but as I said, on the justice side, I was at a police town hall just a few days ago, and they were talking about bail reform, because what difference does it make if you find someone who's high risk, who's created problems in society, arrest them, the police may arrest them, but within a few hours, in some cases, definitely in a day, they're back out on the street because there's no proper follow through on the justice side. And that's where the cooperation has to happen with the province, so that you ensure that these outcomes where you're focused on, well, especially policing, you have a robust and effective policy that does deal with these situations. But these are some of the challenges that I think also, like I said, when it touches on transit, there's just this thing where people have just gotten used to this behavior where You can shoot up on the transit, you can, hang out, loiter, you can give people a hard time that are trying to get to work or whatever. And it's normalized. This has to change. And so the barriers at the LRTs will make a huge difference. Unfortunately, we'll have to also take time and cost to put peace officers or others who are able to enforce things on the buses. Because again, my staff have told me situations that they should have never had to deal with on their way to work, but because there's just no control anywhere.
All right. Harrison writes in and says City Council has been dysfunctional. I don't think parties are going to make a big difference because it's just as dysfunctional in cities like Vancouver. They've got the party system in Quebec as well. How can you bring councillors along with your agenda to revive Edmonton?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because I think it speaks to what we've been talking about, working together, trying to find common ground, trying to put the best foot forward for what we as representatives would be doing for the city, and trying to start from a place where we have commonality rather than focus on the differences. I've shared the story when I was fortunate enough to be the caucus chair in our national government at the time when I had to try to deal with a number of challenges and issues. And even though I joined a political party, I found that maybe you agree with about 20 or 30% of what the party's doing. You're often at odds with the other 70%. And there always has to be a, give and take and some challenging debates and so on and so forth. But as caucus chair, I had to manage that effectively day to day with where I found fires starting in certain provinces or in certain regions or members of caucus getting upset. I had to do the work to really sit down, make sure they were heard, share that with those that were making decisions, ensure that they had a voice was heard, and that then we came to some sort of consensus. And even sometimes, even though we couldn't get consensus, there was that feeling that there was an effective ear hearing the concerns and ensuring that we were taking these things into consideration moving forward. City council has to be no different, but the great thing about city council is it's a smaller group than what I was dealing with with the national caucus. You're talking about 12, 13 people as opposed to 200 or 220. And so again, finding commonality, because there's going to be differences of opinion, no doubt, with whoever gets elected. I know the question talked about political parties. There's some slates this time around in the municipal race. There's a political party. I would hazard a bet that probably not all of these slates or political or party is going to get elected fully into as councillors in the next after the next election. So you're going to need to be able to have some leadership in the mayor's chair that identifies what's important to each of all these councillors, develop a relationship with them to identify what is something that we all have as common ground that we can move forward, and then see if some of these other ideas that maybe not necessarily in lockstep with the other councils, how, if it makes sense, how can we maybe get support for some of these things? But it's about communication. It's about building a relationship. It's about creating a spirit that shows that there's not going to be partisanship, but we're going to work together as best as possible. And what leadership tools can you use to ensure that that commonality can be focused on? And that's where I think I've got a real strength to offer. And I don't think anyone can do worse than what we've seen with this current mayor and council. That's at least the upside. But I think that's something that really we need to give our heads a shake after the next municipal election and say, let's focus on how we can work together rather than be dysfunctional as we've seen.
I don't think people would believe it now, but in your days in Ottawa, New Democrats would go for a drink with a conservative or a liberal would, and you'd get along across the aisle.
And I'm glad you commented on that, because one of my campaign advisors, he's not living in Alberta, but he and I became friends back in the day when I was in Ottawa, and he was on the total opposite side of me. He was he worked with the NDP. He was involved with the leadership before campaigns, worked with NDP MPs, and he and I became good friends because there was a lot of common things we shared. And he grew up here in Calgary, but of course lived out east afterwards. But yeah, we focused on the things that brought us together: our passion for the country, our love for soccer, for instance, or for other things hockey that we used to have a commonality when we were all in Ottawa. and we became friends and we remained friends. And so even though there were times where we had heated debate and sometimes really upset about certain things on committee, whatever, without fail there would be an opportunity, you'd see those people again and you'd talk to them. You would, whether it was at the local pub or sometimes right on the hill, chat with them, because there was a personal respect, there was a level of understanding that, yeah, we all care about these things. We may have different views on how we achieve them, but the fact that we care about this, we should give each other respect and time and try to understand where we're coming from. And as a result, there was some understanding and tweaking in certain positions. That's what democracy is supposed to be. And so I'm really happy you said that, because I lament the fact that that doesn't seem to happen anymore. That it's almost seen as a bad thing if you're fraternizing with the enemy, whatever that means. I mean, we're all supposed to be our best to represent our constituents at whatever level, and so there shouldn't be this type of painting a picture that, oh, you're talking to the enemy. No, that's in my opinion, that's a sign of strength.
Pretty fierce softball league too, from what I remember.
That's right. Well, we had this soccer. It was something that we were joking, because things changed. They used to have play hockey, and then they had softball, and then all of a sudden, all these we joked and said ethnic guys were getting elected: Italians, East Indians, others, Africans. We played soccer, most of us, so we started a soccer group, which was really great. Again, with this fellow Jeff from the NDP and Peter Stoffer, we had a soccer team that played other teams, and we just had fun. Again, it built a bit of camaraderie and brought MPs together, because now not only were we battling on the hill, but now you had to pass to your partner to score, who was from the Liberal Party or whatever. It didn't matter. We just were all together, and as I said, that sort of spirit spilled over in some of the things that we would do and the way we'd handle certain problems.
Okay, wrap up here with recurring themes, and one of them, of course, is infill. As you listen, any more ideas coming your way?
Well, I think that one thing immediately, like repealing the current blanket zoning laws, is something that I know we've heard from a lot of people, because it's just so unpopular. But I would go one step further and say, we know that this is still in place until I think to 2027. We could maybe look at how we can take it out or change it once we get to after this municipal election. But one thing for sure that would change the development of these monstrosity type developments in the middle of neighborhoods, right in the middle of blocks, is attach a parking stall, at least one to each dwelling or each suite that's being built. If you do that, you're really going to limit the ability for these really big unnecessary developments in the middle of blocks between bungalows, as I've seen. Just the outcomes again that are completely opposite of what I think the decision makers would have wanted. But again, they're not bending, they're not adjusting, they're not looking at the negative impacts and saying, well, maybe we need to fix it in this case. But just a blanket, zoning bylaw like this that has these outcomes that are so outrageous is so irresponsible. I don't know how many of the councillors and the mayor can look at themselves in the mirror and say, look what we're doing. We're damaging and we're completely destroying people's livelihoods based on their equity in their homes. With a simple change, you could just reverse that and still have the desirable effect of density and development in a manageable way in these communities, which is something that, again, is just beyond me, that they aren't able to just adjust that in the best interest of their citizens.
Is making the facade fit in with the neighborhood, is that a remedy as well?
Well, I think definitely there's certain neighborhoods that have certain criteria that you could take that into consideration. To the credit of some developers, they're putting in some units that are very tasteful, that fit into the neighborhood, that really do upgrade things. So I think, again, it's something that, with the ability to listen to public input, the ability to work with those developers who are responsible and hopefully influence others that may be wanting to just maximize profits at all costs, by putting certain things in place would put the checks and balances on these things. But again, really listening to our public. I know I've cited one of my friends in Garneau, who this 16 unit rooming house appeared in a community that all family homes, mostly all single family homes. No one in that whole community, they felt, as much as they tried to communicate to the city hall the negative impacts of this development, it fell on deaf ears. There was no interaction or nothing taken seriously. It's like I said, the city hall and this council and mayor made a decision to go forward and just refused to see the negative outcomes on any of it because they're based on ideology. We want more density at all costs. No concern about, yeah, there's always going to be exceptions. That's one of the ways you manage the city. There's different circumstances coming up in different places. You have to be able to be nimble enough to adjust. Absolutely not. They're just so focused on this thing that they won't consider any type of change. And that's what the citizens were saying. They were just so disappointed because there was no meaningful way that they felt any of their concerns were being heard.
All right, last few seconds. What's on your mind in terms of what's coming up in the next week or two that we can look forward to?
Well, we will be continuing on, Scott, with our town halls. Next week, we'll be shifting to in person. So I'm really looking forward to that because I know that even though in person can be a little bit more challenging, here we're able to get people involved, obviously, and get their questions. But when you're dealing with one-on-one with people, things can be sometimes more heated, more passionate, but that's great. I think that's important. I can't wait to take time to hear more from people on a host of issues. We're trying to reach as many as we can over the course of the next few weeks and month as we get closer and closer to the thick of things of this electoral municipal campaign, of course. But I want to take a moment to just thank. I notice every time we have these town halls, there's so many more people registered and they're following it. They may not participate with questions, but the fact that there are people listening, thinking, adding their voice to some of the things that we're formulating and the policies that we're planning to put forward. I'm very pleased with the turnout during these virtual sessions. And as I said, I look forward over the next week to some of the in-person ones. I want to thank those who did participate, at least if they listened and heard, and of course our questions. I want to encourage you, if you do enjoy and if you think we're on the right track for the work we're trying to do to change City Hall, join us, join the Revive Edmonton tour, join our campaign, donate, sign up to order a sign, all the things that are so important as we get closer to the thick of things when they really heat up at the end of August and moving into the last 2 months of this campaign. I look forward to hearing from more of you and seeing our team and campaign grow and the excitement and the energy that's coming with it. And thanks again to you, Scott, for doing such a great job helping to moderate this over the last number of sessions that we've been hosting the virtual town halls.
And if you want to find out more about the in-person ones, just the simple way, Google Jaffer for mayor. That'll get you to Raheem's website, and that'll give you all the information about what's next. So have a good long weekend, everyone. You too, and enjoy the long weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, have a great long weekend.